It's the Ballad of Belle to Costa Greene. Medieval flow. Olive complexion, green eye reflection. Proud black lady, but maybe not in detection.
Hi, Rachael.
Anne-Marie.
I'm not gonna welcome you to Boss Like Belle because you're the co-host. So, hi. I'm gonna say hi.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here on this bonus episode.
Exactly. So, I thought we would start by just talking about like who you are, how we got to know each other, how we got to be working on the podcast together, and then jumping into more about your work as a leadership expert and executive coach.
Wonderful. That sounds great. So I can start. So listeners know I'm Rachael Lowell Ellison. I am an executive coach and a leadership expert. And we can talk about where we met first. We met at Harvard. We talk about that in the first episode of the podcast. You were my client in my role there internally as an executive coach for Harvard, and we started working together, and this idea came to fruition. But before that, my background and training was from Columbia University in terms of social organizational psychology, and then I got my certification from Brown in executive coaching. And I started to develop a fascination with work life as it intersects with organizational effectiveness in about 2008, 2009, after I worked on a project. And it became my focus, and it's become my focus again.
That's fantastic. And
yeah.
It's funny, like listeners who remember episode 1, we talked about how we met through this focused leadership program.
Mm-hmm.
And you were great with just what I've been calling going off piste, right? We were supposed to be doing this, what was it, IDP, like individual
development plan.
And I was like, I'm not feeling it, I have another idea, and you're like, let's hear it. And you were so great with like going through the flow and focusing on the purpose and outcome as opposed to like this kind of structured format that we were all supposed to adhere to. So I just want to say thank you, because I don't know if we'd be here today with the podcast if you hadn't been so open to exploring this different channel.
I like to follow my client's energy, right? And you lit up when you talked about it. So it wasn't like you said, I have this other idea. Let's just do that instead of this IDP. You were like, you were glowing. And so it really was, what a waste of an opportunity it would have been had I said like, no, we got to course correct and do this specific structure. So I'm so thrilled that you shared it with me and we were able to work on it together.
And could you say like, what is an executive coach for people who might not be familiar or haven't, engaged with someone like you?
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. I think when people first hear about coaches, there's a lot of coaches out there today, right? When I started coaching in 2009, it was very much of a different era. Now there's coaches for everything. I think initially when people hear about coaching in the workplace, they think about like a therapist for the workplace. And that's not the role of a coach. The role of a coach is actually it's definitely to support leaders who are now, and we can talk about this in a little bit, operating in this moment, this kind of crisis moment, this breaking point that everyone's feeling just with the pressure and the change coming at us from all angles. So it is about supporting leaders through that, but it's also about helping leaders recenter themselves and understand they might have goals in mind, but how they can actually move beyond self-imposed obstacles and challenges that they might not even realize that they have to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish in the world. So that's what I think my role is, to guide, to challenge, to also mirror back what the leader's strengths are and challenges are, and also what is happening in the workplace around them. So
absolutely. And before we kind of like dive deep into your practice, I'd just love to ask you a little bit more about your role in the podcast.
Sure.
So How would you summarize like what you bring to the podcast? And like, I see you as this kind of like interpreter of Belle, like what she was doing in her time, like how we might think about it and talk about it these days, and also like myself too. Some of the fans who have kind of like reached out to say what they love about the show, a couple of them have said Rachael asked really good questions. So I'd just love to hear you, just your thoughts a little bit about your role in the podcast and about Belle.
Sure. I mean, it's been a true privilege, right? So we had this conversation in the context of coaching, and it's very much out of character for me as a coach to partner with a coachee, with a client, and say, let's do this together. But there was clearly a story that you wanted to tell that was so magical, and you were, thinking about, should you write it? Should you film it? Right. And so being able to have someone to play the role of interpreter, to play the role, and I think I do this in my work in general, just mirroring back, right? Both what the individual's experience is and in terms of the context that they were operating in, right? And beyond that, so I get to see Belle's magic, learn about it through like the most informed teacher. I mean, you just know, so you've just brought her to life in such a absolutely stunning way. And I'm able to learn those stories and kind of understand from a leadership lens in 1914, what she was doing that was so remarkable, and then tying it to both general observations of leaders today and your specific qualities that you're trying to and are developing kind of in her honor, in her, through her. You said, I think at one point when we were talking about her, that she was a human vision board, basically. And I saw it right away, and it's so rare to be able to find a historical figure who gives you that kind of guidance and inspiration. And you found her, and I've just been thrilled to come along for the journey and help you figure out how to live her lessons today.
And if I could just probe that a little bit more, just hearing you talk about that, one of the things that I've really learned and really enjoyed about doing this with you is tapping into your wealth of knowledge about the theory and academics behind leadership. And so often you're interpreting what Belle was doing or what I'm trying to do now through research, like not just from your own
right
and your own. And then you have also invented your own frameworks, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But I love how you say, well, actually, this research has talked about this in this context, and actually, like Belle is kind of like an early case study as an example of that. That I find just really amazing, and it reminds me that we really should write up show notes with some links to some of these articles and books that you reference.
Sure, yeah, we can make a little.
Yeah, so much treasure, so much gold to each episode with these little nuggets for people to delve deeper into.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was not a wannabe researcher. I actually did 3 years of clinical psych research. I thought that was the path that I was going. So I decided I was very clear that I did not want to be a researcher as a career. I wanted to be a practitioner, and I'm really happy with that choice. But I have so much reverence for research, and I like to keep my eye out for things that can help us better elucidate what we're trying to do here, right? In this workplace, in this world around us, right? What theories can help us, and research can help us get where we want to go. So I'm always eager to pull in really insightful pieces of research.
Yeah, you do it beautifully, seamlessly as well.
Thank you.
So what would you say or ask Belle if you could meet her?
I think what came to mind, just as you asked that, because you mentioned, we talked about we talked about reflecting on a question like that before we started, but this just hit me. What I'm curious about is if she would share it with me, which she might not, but to really hear what were the moments that you felt really scared, right? She's so brave, right? And she tackled so many challenges, that when I picture her, I see this like fashionable, brave woman who is just so smart and builds these amazing communities around her. And I want to kind of see behind the, we talked about, she wrote journals, right? She had a practice of journaling that she didn't share, she destroyed, she didn't allow to be shared after her death. And I think there's something there that she was keeping, close to the vest, right? And I would love to know a little bit about those moments that she did get overwhelmed or scared, and what she did to move past those. Because I think that's the only piece that I feel like we really can't see in her story, like, directly. And certainly a lot of people don't share that. That's not common, but I would love to know, what were the moments that you were scared, and what did you muster within yourself to push yourself beyond the fear?
Absolutely. And just lastly, what does bossing like Belle mean to you? Or leadership like Belle?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's seeing, I think it's taking those the boldness comes right to the surface for me, right? Yeah. She was bold in her action. She was bold in her words. She was bold in her clothes. She was bold in, her everything, right? It just, so I think it's that, but I also think one of the things you convey so well as you lead us through this journey, through her life and leadership, is showing us, she saw the whole board. She was not just looking at, she could have just been the personal librarian to J. Pierre Pont Morgan, and that doing that really well, that could have been it, right? But she saw all of these ways in which she wanted to have an impact, and she hit all those marks, right? And again, I see so much, the podcast came together as a way to challenge yourself to boss like Belle, but there's so much of her in you that you can just see. You've got this passion and this kind of holistic vision of what the world can be like when you make your imprint on it. And I see that in both of you. So bossing like Belle is the boldness. It's the holistic kind of look at the world and the commitment to leaving your mark.
Thank you. So in one of the episodes, I think episode 5, I mentioned very briefly about how I had this incredible career opportunity come up, and that I actually decided against taking it on. And you were really instrumental in helping me think through that. And you gave me a preview of something that you were working on in your own practice called Shift. And I'm just wondering, could you share what that is and like how it's applicable? Because I used it for a kind of like personal / professional decision, but really it's intended for a greater and a bigger purpose. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners.
Sure. So Shift came out of, as I said, I was working in the work-life space. I did a paper about work-life practices and organizational effectiveness in 2008, 2009, and did a lot of work in the space of work, family, parental leave, flexibility. And then I went into Harvard and sort of left that behind for a little bit. And then the pandemic hit. And I ended up coming back into that space and thinking about work, what work is, what work can be, what it should be going forward. And as we said, I love research. So I was reading all of the things that were coming out of the Surgeon General's office, of Deloitte, of McKinsey. Anybody who was writing, Stanford, anyone who was writing about how this whole system of work that we had been operating in for decades and decades was really starting to change, and why it was starting to change and how. And it fascinated me. And I started to look and kind of crystallize what are the 5 different areas that are really changing. What do leaders need to know about how they're changing and how they can operate within them? So the first is about, it's called security. And what I mean by that is self-regulation. How do we become aware of our own reactivity and learn to center ourselves as leaders, so that we can create a safe environment for folks emotionally and, in every other way, so that folks can bring their best selves to work. Horizon is about it's a future focus, and it's thinking about, we've definitely learned over the past 5 years that the future is not something we can pin down, right? It's changing so rapidly. So how do we develop strategies to change with the times and to anticipate change and build skills to help us move through it? With impact, that's about connection to purpose. So really being able to articulate, why are we doing what we're doing? Research shows it's very important to the success of individuals and the company. And then how do we measure what success is? So I've done a lot of work on performance management, and so that comes in here too. How do you define success with numbers? And then fluidity looks at change management. How do we do it? How do we communicate about it? And how do we implement it, particularly around when and where we work? So the flexibility piece that's become so central to our workplace over the past 5 years. And then the last is ties. And it's about, we have, at one point, the Surgeon General, who I keep referring to, declared, isolation and loneliness as a big public health risk, right? We have moved into this new era of work where we're all dispersed. And that's a wonderful thing in certain ways, but in some ways it's made us really unlearn how to be together in a productive way, right? So this is the piece that I work on. So we look at how to help folks regulate, how to help folks identify what the future could look like and build the skills for it. Meaning, I establish meaning and measure it, navigate change and flexibility, and build strong connections. So that's the shift model. And when we were talking about your work opportunity, we were looking at, as you evaluated the options in front of you, right? Which of those areas did you need to really prioritize, right? You don't have to get all of those right? I come from the philosophy that we build from strength, we build around what's needed, not the deficiency model, right? So how are you what gave you the sense that you would feel, secure and regulated in that environment? What skills did you want to learn? How did you know if you would make an impact, change, and building community? So it was using that lens to assess an opportunity and see if it was going to meet your needs. And it wasn't a good fit, but it's a good framework. I find that the framework is really versatile, both for individual decision making and planning, and for thinking about how to impact the system. So with all the content that I present to folks, I look at how leaders can develop those competencies for themselves, and then what that means when you're translating it into the greater system.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that was a fairly recent framework that you've come up with, and you've now, you gave me a preview, and I didn't fully appreciate how generous that was at the time. But you've now started rolling that out to others. And in fact, I had the opportunity to become part of your first cohort of a small group of leaders, going through the SHIFT program. Can you say how you've kind of expanded that actually into a program?
Sure. So it's exciting. It's been this evolving idea, right? So first I put together an assessment tool so folks could really identify what their strengths are in these different areas and what they gravitate towards, so they could build from there. And then I designed this program, and you were part of the pilot. So thank you for coming in and doing the experience with me. But I there were 7 leaders who came in, and I sort of introduced all this content to you, and then got your feedback. And what I realized was we needed to offer folks a couple different options. And one is completely asynchronous learning. So I've created 12 modules. There's an introductory module, and then for each of the 5 domains, there's one mini module, which is like a 10-minute video that talks about the individual perspective, and then one that talks about the systemic view. So for security, we talk about leader self-regulation and what that means. And then we talk about building regulation on your team and how you build in accountability, so folks really learn to own their own emotional, responses instead of just reacting with a lot of, without really thinking about what's around them. So that's kind of what I have for each of those different domains, each of the 5 domains. And then in the last module, we talk about how do you sustain the shift. So now that you have these skills and this knowledge, how do you take it and make an action plan that can actually help you move forward in the way that you would feel would really help you to be less overwhelmed, to be more calm and excited about the work that you're doing, rather than feeling kind of just constantly. And what I'm hearing from folks is just that they're trying to wrangle teams that aren't aligning, that they've got a ton of priorities that they don't know how to manage, that it's just a very difficult time for folks. So this is about establishing a compass so that you can really kind of look across the board like Belle did and see what you want to focus on at any given time. So I have the 12 asynchronous modules that you can do completely independently. And then on January 27th, I'm launching another cohort limited to 8 people. And in that program, I offer 2 individual coaching sessions for each participant, as well as group coaching and facilitation. So they'll also have access to the modules, but then they'll be able to come in and with a group of senior leader peers, be able to discuss some of these themes, learn from each other's experiences, and then also have my coaching to be able to identify their individual and kind of organizational goal that they'll be focusing on throughout the program. So those are the 2 options. And then I'm bringing the modules into different organizations as well, who are looking to bring shift in for their teams and teach this to their people.
That's all so exciting. And I know you've already got a lot of requests and going to be really busy. I think it was really smart to come up with the asynchronous version, because, the kind of level of people you're dealing with, they're very busy people. And so it's hard for us all to meet at the same time and to, give it our full attention. And so I really appreciate having this access to the asynchronous materials. I can really, absorb it and really actually kind of put it to practice. But there were certain things that have just stuck with me, like this idea of self-regulation. I remember when you were asking me for examples of maybe lack of self-regulation, and I share some both in the kind of personal and professional realm. There was one crazy example I told you about, kind of evacuating my fridge in the middle of the night because I thought that the fridge was broken and that my breast milk would spoil and all this kind of craziness, and it has actually stayed with me, what you talked about, that self-regulation, and even just pausing a beat and asking myself is that actually true? And I apply that in so many different areas. It just helps me to be less hotly reactive. But also in discussing that with you, I also realize moments where I tend to be hesitant and also indecisive, and that's kind of hypo arousal as well, right? So it was just really interesting. I feel what I've learned from you is these concepts behind things that I'm feeling and doing that I wasn't even really able to articulate or understand why. And you've always, and just like you are in the podcast, really good at putting a name to things. And for me, when something is named, and also you understand that it's not just you experiencing something, but it's common to others as well, it just really helps you to kind of reflect on it, and also just be in a space where you can be open to change, because if you don't know what you're trying to change, then you're not going to get very far.
Exactly. Exactly. We talk about in the program and in general, I talk about this idea of the window of tolerance, right? So when you're
Yeah.
talking about hyper arousal, we think of the window as kind of this is where we want to be. We want to be inside the window where we're feeling calm and centered and collective and clear about what we want to be able to accomplish. And when we're above the window, we're in that hyper arousal mode that you're describing. And we're in that like fight or flight, like I better accomplish this, or like,
Yeah.
or it's not going to work. And then, conversely, when we're under the window, we are just like, as you said, hesitant, not really, like kind of frozen a little bit.
Yeah.
So what's happened over the past 5 years or so is as we've had all this chronic stress and different changes in our environment, our windows have gotten smaller. So we're starting to, we lose our patience much more easily. We might be frustrated with colleagues. We might be, distracted, and we tend to bounce from up to down, right? It's hard for us to kind of stay level and get into that window. So by helping leaders figure that out, how to become self-aware. So just even to notice when you're in the window and when you're not,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then put in place certain practices that can help you, whether it's like Belle with journaling or meditation or yoga or just taking a walk in the woods, which is my favorite. What can you do to get yourself to recenter so you're not making decisions for yourself, for your family, for your organization, where you're making it up here and you're like, you know what, we got to do all the things, right? But you're not coming in from like, from a frozen place, but you're really you're able to access your creativity. So everything else, building skills and future focus, measuring performance, navigating change, building connection, all that is kind of built on the foundation of can you operate from your highest self? And so that's what I try to start with for leaders, is to be able to recognize where that is, then regulate. And then all of your actions are very intentional because you're not coming from a reactive place. You're coming from that creative place. That's what I've always tried to teach people, but it's hard. But it's a really hard skill to really be able to help people understand where they're at and name it, as you said, right? And then to move through it, right? So that's where I think we've skipped in a lot of leadership development programs. We've skipped building that awareness because it seems really hard to do. And it feels, I think, for a lot of people like, okay, I don't want to get into, and I used to be this person, by the way, like 3 years ago, right before you met me, like I was so left brain, so hyper arousal, never, didn't really get any of this meditation stuff and didn't really think about this idea of self-regulation. But now that I see it, I can't unsee it. And I see when my leaders that I work with are able to really embody just these practices, just develop regular practice around it. I see a huge difference in what they're able to accomplish both for themselves and with their teams. And there's been some great case studies that have come up. So
that's fantastic. And where can listeners who want to know more, where should they go to learn more or even work with you?
Sure. So great question. So my company is called Reworking Leadership. So you can find me at reworkingleadership.com. You see in the navigation bar, it says shift, and you can just click there and see the different courses that are available, or see what coaching opportunities might be like with me. I'm also hosting a free webinar on January 9th at 11 a.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about how to create security, as we talked about, and a safe space, even in the midst of this kind of big political change that we're experiencing here in the U.S., how you create spaces for your team, not to address the political divide, but to be able to unite around just being human and being together in the workplace and being able to center yourselves for the sake of the work. So that is going to be something that is free and open to everyone on January 9th. And then I would love to to communicate with anybody who finds the work interesting and wants to learn more.
That's fantastic. And you'd like to also offer something like access?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Yes. So I am going to offer two things. There'll be a promo, so you'll be able to see kind of what is involved in the courses, just a little short one. And then the first module is going to be offered to listeners free. So
that's fantastic. And can you remind us again, what's the first module about? Is that
it's just an overview. Okay. It's an overview of the whole program, so that way you get to see what Shift is about, and if you want to dive in and learn more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for stepping out from behind the scenes of the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
And sharing about your own journey and your own work and all of the expertise that goes behind your contributions to the podcast. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that our listeners will agree and be happy to finally see who you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a lovely journey.
Elected fellow Medieval Academy of America. The second woman and the first person of color. Miss Belle Costa Greene, unlike any other.